The central concourse of the Mirava space station was a vibrant, chaotic nexus of life. Beings of all shapes and colors moved with purpose, their voices blending into a symphony of languages and sounds. Holographic signs hovered mid-air, advertising goods and services from every corner of the galaxy. Ethan strode through the crowd, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was where he felt alive, among the varied and unpredictable throngs of the universe. A human diplomat specializing in cultural research, Ethan had come to Mirava for an interspecies exchange program. His mission was simple in concept but complex in execution, to understand alien cultures better and foster mutual respect. Today, he was scheduled to meet with a linguist from the mysterious Varethian race, known for their unique methods of communication. Though he had read the briefing files, nothing had quite prepared him for what awaited. He stepped through the tall arched doorway of the designated meeting hall, pausing for a moment as his eyes adjusted to the soft, shimmering light. The room was circular, its walls lined with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse faintly. At the center stood a figure unlike any he had encountered before. She was tall, with an ethereal grace that made her seem almost weightless. Her skin shimmered with a soft, silvery hue, and her eyes, deep pools of shifting colors, met his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Welcome, Ethan of Earth," she said, her voice resonant yet gentle. "I am Kerr." He stepped forward, offering a smile and a slight bow. "Kerr, it's an honor to meet you. I've heard much about the Varethian people." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture he interpreted as curiosity. "And I have read of humans. You are unpredictable, passionate, and often driven by curiosity. I find this intriguing." "Guilty as charged," he said with a chuckle. "I hope that curiosity doesn't put me at a disadvantage here." "Not at all," she replied, gesturing for him to join her at a low table adorned with glowing crystals. "Curiosity is the foundation of all understanding. Let us explore it together." As they sat, the crystals emitted a gentle light that seemed to shift in response to their proximity. Ethan leaned closer, fascinated. "What are these?" "Resonance stones," Gray explained. "They react to emotions, amplifying the energy between those who communicate near them. It allows for deeper understanding." Ethan nodded, suddenly aware of the subtle vibration in the air. "So, it's not just words here, is it? There's more to communication." "Precisely." Hare's gaze softened. "Our people believe that words alone are insufficient. True communication involves the exchange of feelings, intentions, and even memories." Intrigued, Ethan leaned back slightly. "That's incredible. But how does it work with someone like me? I don't have your abilities." "We shall see," she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "If you are willing." "I am," he said without hesitation. Hare placed her hand on one of the stones, and its glow intensified. "Then close your eyes, Ethan. Breathe. Focus on our connection." He did as instructed, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. At first, he felt only the warmth of the light, the gentle hum of energy. But slowly, images began to form, vague at first, then clearer. He saw moments from his childhood, running through fields, his mother's laughter, the scent of rain-soaked earth. It was as if these memories were being shared, not just remembered. He opened his eyes, meeting Kare's gaze. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a depth there, a recognition of what he had shared. "You saw." "I did," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing." "How?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. "I didn't even realize I was projecting." "The stones help," Kare explained. "But it is your openness that made it possible." Ethan took a moment to process this. "So you can see my memories. Does that mean that you may see mine if I choose to share?" she finished. "Would you like to?" He nodded, and she placed her hand over his. The moment their skin touched, the resonant stones flared, and Ethan was overwhelmed by a flood of images and sensations. He saw Kare as a child, standing by a vast, shimmering lake. He felt her fear during her first solo expedition into the unknown reaches of space. He sensed her pride when she first mastered the art of telepathic communication. But there was also loneliness, an ache he recognized all too well. When the connection ended, he was left breathless. "Kare, that was intense," she supplied, her voice quieter now. "I did not expect such a strong connection." "Neither did I," he admitted. "But I'm glad. I feel like I know you, really know you." She nodded, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. It is rare, this level of resonance. Perhaps it is a sign that our work together will be fruitful. I like that, he said, meaning it. They continued their conversation, moving beyond the surface-level exchange of words to explore the nuances of each other's cultures. Ethan spoke of Earth's history, its triumphs and mistakes, while Kare described the Varethian way of life, rooted in empathy, connection, and a deep respect for the cosmos. As the hours passed, they found themselves laughing, questioning, and marveling at each other's experiences. When they finally rose to leave, Ethan felt a strange reluctance to let the moment end. "Will I see you again?" he asked, the question more earnest than he intended. Kare's eyes softened. "Yes, Ethan. There is much more for us to learn." With that, she turned and walked away, her form disappearing into the soft glow of the corridor. Ethan watched her go, a mix of curiosity, respect, and something deeper stirring within him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew that this encounter was only the beginning of something far greater than he had anticipated. And as he stepped back into the bustling heart of the space station, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn he would never forget. Chapter 2: Language Beyond Words. The next day, Ethan found himself standing before the entrance to the Varethian embassy on Mireva Station. The structure was unlike anything else on the station. Its walls appeared to shift and shimmer, as though they were alive. He hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of nervousness before stepping inside. A soft, melodic chime resonated, signaling his arrival. "Welcome, Ethan," came a familiar voice, warm and soothing. Kare appeared from a side corridor, her silvery form moving with an effortless grace. She inclined her head slightly in greeting. "I am glad you came." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of ease wash over him. "Thank you for inviting me. I'm curious to learn more." She gestured for him to follow. "Then come. Today, I will introduce you to the deeper aspects of our communication methods." They walked through the hallways of the embassy, which were adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to glow softly in response to their presence. Ethan couldn't help but be mesmerized by the beauty of the place. "Your home is incredible. It feels alive." Tara glanced at him, her eyes sparkling. "It is, in a way. Our structures are designed to resonate with the energies of those within. Everything here serves a purpose: connection, harmony, understanding." They arrived at a chamber bathed in a soft, bluish light. At its center was a circular platform surrounded by what appeared to be floating orbs of light. Kare stepped onto the platform, motioning for Ethan to join her. "This is our communication chamber," she explained. "It allows us to connect beyond words, sharing thoughts, emotions, even memories in a controlled and safe manner." Ethan stepped onto the platform, feeling a subtle vibration beneath his feet. "How does it work?" Kare held out her hands, palms facing him. "Place your hands over mine." He did as instructed, their hands hovering inches apart. The floating orbs began to pulse in rhythm with their breaths. "Breathe deeply," she instructed, her voice calm and reassuring. "Focus on your thoughts, but do not force them. Let them flow." At first, Ethan felt nothing but the warmth of the room and the faint hum of energy. But slowly images and sensations began to surface. Memories of his childhood, the scent of rain on earth, the feel of wind against his face. He sensed Kare's presence, like a gentle touch at the edges of his mind. Her thoughts were there, too. Curiosity, a touch of apprehension, and something deeper, something she kept guarded. "Can you feel it?" she asked, her voice echoing both in his ears and within his mind. "Yes," he whispered, his eyes meeting hers. "It's incredible." She nodded, her expression softening. "This is the beginning. Now I will share a memory. Open your mind." The world around them seemed to blur, and suddenly, Ethan was standing on a vast plain beneath a sky filled with swirling lights. He could feel the cool breeze on his skin and hear the distant calls of strange creatures. Beside him, Kare stood, her expression serene. "This is my home," she said quietly. "The plains of Varethia. It is where I was born." Ethan turned slowly, taking it all in. "It's beautiful." Kare led him through the memory, showing him moments from her past, her childhood lessons, her first attempts at telepathic communication, the pride of her elders when she succeeded. But there were also moments of isolation, of feeling misunderstood even among her own kind. Ethan felt her emotions as if they were his own, the weight of her experiences settling over him. When the memory faded, They were back in the chamber, their hands still hovering close but not touching. Ethan took a shaky breath. Thank you for sharing that. It is not easy to open oneself, Corey admitted. But I believe understanding must start with vulnerability. Ethan nodded, his respect for her growing. I'd like to share something with you if you're willing. I am. He closed his eyes, focusing on a memory, a day from his past that had shaped him. He was a young boy, standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast forest. His father was beside him, pointing out landmarks and telling stories of their family's history. It was a moment of connection, a feeling anchored to something greater than himself. Kare's presence was there, experiencing it with him. When the memory ended, he opened his eyes to find her watching him intently. You carry the weight of your past with you, she said softly. It shapes who you are. I suppose we all do, he replied. But it doesn't have to define us. She tilted her head, considering his words. You are more complex than I anticipated. Is that a compliment? He teased, a smile tugging at his lips. It is an observation, she replied, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. There is more to show you. They spent hours in a chamber, exploring each other's memories, sharing thoughts and emotions. With each connection, their bond grew stronger. They laughed at shared jokes, marveled at their differences, and found common ground in unexpected places. At one point, Kare placed her hand over his, a gesture of trust. Ethan, this connection is rare. Even among my people, such resonance is unusual. I feel it too, he said, his voice earnest. I don't know what it means, but I want to understand it. Then we will, she said simply. Together. As they left the chamber, the floating orbs dimming behind them, Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in a long time. He and Kare walked side by side through the embassy's corridors, their steps in sync. Will you return tomorrow? She asked as they reached the entrance. If you'll have me, he replied. I will. They parted ways, but as Ethan made his way back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had begun. Their connection was more than just a meeting of minds. It was the start of something neither of them fully understood, but both were willing to explore. Chapter 3. A Journey Through Traditions. The air in the Varethian cultural exhibit was filled with a soft, rhythmic hum. Ethan felt it resonating in his chest as he stepped through the tall, arched doorway, his eyes wide with curiosity. Kare stood beside him, her silvery skin catching the light from the luminescent orbs that floated gently above. She turned to him, a subtle smile playing on her lips. Welcome to the heart of our culture, she said, gesturing to the vast hall. Here, we preserve the traditions of our ancestors and share them with those who wish to understand. Ethan nodded, taking in the intricate displays that lined the walls. Each exhibit was a blend of light, sound, and texture, creating a sensory experience unlike anything he'd encountered before. It's incredible, he said, his voice tinged with awe. I've never seen anything like it. Kare led him to the first display, a swirling hologram of interconnected symbols. This represents the cycle of renewal, she explained. It is one of our most sacred traditions, symbolizing the constant ebb and flow of life. Ethan leaned in, captivated by the way the symbols shifted and changed. How do you honor it? She stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the display. Through rituals of reflection and renewal. Each cycle, we release what holds us back and embrace new beginnings. It is a time of introspection and transformation. He nodded thoughtfully. I think humans could learn a lot from that. She glanced at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. Perhaps. But tell me, Ethan, what traditions do your people hold dear? He hesitated, considering the question. We have many. Some are tied to family, others to community or personal beliefs. One of my favorites is a tradition my family followed every year, lighting a candle for those we've lost. It's a way to remember, to honor their impact on our lives. Kare's expression softened. That is a beautiful. They continued through the exhibit, each display revealing more about the Varethian way of life. Ethan marveled at the artistic precision of their ceremonial garments, the intricate dance patterns performed during celebrations, and the music that seemed to flow like a living thing. Each element spoke of a people deeply connected to their past and committed to preserving their heritage. At one point, Kare guided him to a large, circular platform. This is the ritual of connection, she said, her voice quieter now. It is a dance performed by two who seek to deepen their bond. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A dance. She nodded, a hint of nervousness in her eyes. It requires trust, vulnerability, and openness. Would you be willing to try? He stepped onto the platform without hesitation. Show me. Kare took his hand, her touch cool and steady. Follow my lead, she said, guiding him through the first movements. The platform glowed beneath their feet, responding to their steps. Ethan focused on matching her rhythm, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in her movements. As the dance progressed, the glow intensified, creating patterns that mirrored their connection. Ethan felt a rush of emotions, curiosity, excitement, and a deepening respect for the woman beside him. This is something else, he said, his voice breathless. Kare smiled, her eyes meeting his. It is meant to bring two souls closer. They continued, their movements becoming more fluid, more instinctive. The platform's glow pulsed in time with their breaths, and for a moment, the rest of the exhibit faded away. There was only the dance, the connection, and the understanding that grew between them. When they finally stepped back, the glow dimmed, leaving them standing in silence. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Thank you for sharing that. It was my honor, Kare replied, her voice tinged with emotion. Few are willing to take such a step. I'm glad I did, he said, his gaze steady. It means a lot to me. They moved to a quieter part of the exhibit, where a small altar stood, adorned with crystals and symbols. This is a place of remembrance, Kare explained. We come here to honor those who have passed and to seek guidance. Ethan knelt beside her, feeling the weight of the moment. Do you have someone you wish to remember? She nodded, placing a hand on the altar. My mentor. She taught me everything I know about our ways. She believed in understanding, in connection. I hope I am making her proud. You are, Ethan said softly. I'm sure of it. Kare's eyes met his, gratitude and vulnerability shining through. And you? Is there someone you wish to honor? He placed a small token, a ring he always carried, on the altar. My father. He taught me to be curious, to seek out new experiences. I think he'd be proud, too. They sat in silence, their shared losses creating a bond that went beyond words. When they finally rose, Kare took his hand once more. There is one more thing I wish to show you. She led him to a chamber filled with light and sound. Ethereal music played, and the air was thick with the scent of flowers. This is the Hall of Reflection, she said, a place to contemplate what we have learned. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. He felt Kare's presence beside him, steady and reassuring. Thank you, Kare, he said quietly. For everything. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Ethan, for being open, for sharing. I feel closer to understanding you. They stood there, side by side, the weight of their experiences settling around them. As they left the exhibit, Ethan knew that this journey was far from over. There was so much more to learn, to share, to experience. And with Kare by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. Their bond had deepened, rooted in trust, respect, and the shared desire to bridge the gap between their worlds. Together, they would continue to explore the unknown, one step at a time. Chapter 4: The Bond Deepens. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the quiet hall as he approached Ara's quarters aboard the Mireva space station. He had learned much about the Varethian people and their culture over the last few days, but today felt different. There's a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, something that he couldn't quite place. The connection between him and Kare had been steadily growing, each shared experience, each unspoken moment of understanding building a foundation beneath their feet. When he arrived at her door, it slid open automatically, and Kare stood waiting for him, her silver skin glowing softly under the ambient lighting of the room. Her eyes, always intense, were even more so today, as though something was simmering beneath the surface. Ethan, she said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of emotion. I'm glad you came. Of course, he said, stepping inside. He took in the room, noting how it seemed both familiar and alien, with its flowing, organic architecture and soft, glowing surfaces. It felt like Kare, elegant, serene, yet full of depth. I've been thinking, Kare began as she moved to a low round table in the center of the room, about how much we've shared already. Our memories, our traditions, but there's still so much we've yet to understand about each other. I want to offer something more. Ethan felt a flicker of intrigue. What do you mean? Kare's gaze met his, her eyes searching. I want to show you something. Something deeper. It's part of our tradition, An offering of trust? Ethan's pulse quickened. There was something in her voice, something that suggested this was more than just a cultural exchange. What kind of trust? He asked, stepping closer. Kaire walked over to a nearby wall and activated a holographic display. The image that appeared was breathtaking, a vast open space filled with floating lights and endless constellations. This, she explained, is a place my people go when they seek to connect with each other at the deepest level. It's called the Realm of Reflection. It's a shared space where two beings can meet beyond their physical forms, where we can truly understand each other. Ethan blinked, trying to wrap his mind around what she was suggesting. You want us to do this together? She nodded. It requires complete openness. It's not something we do lightly. It's an intimate process. But I believe you are ready. He hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. If you think I'm ready, I trust you. With a graceful motion, Kaire reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, a surge of energy rippled between them, the air thick with a subtle hum. Kaire's voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. Close your eyes, Ethan. Trust me. Ethan did as she asked, his heart beating faster now. He felt her presence, felt it in the very core of his being. It wasn't just a physical sensation, there was something more, something that bypassed the limitations of language and touch. He felt her emotions, her hope, her fear, and something more, something he couldn't quite place. And then, suddenly, he was no longer in the room. The world around him blurred, and he found himself standing in a vast, ethereal landscape, surrounded by soft lights that drifted lazily in the air. It was both beautiful and strange, and as he looked around, he realized that Kaire was beside him. This is the realm of reflection, she said softly, a place where minds can meet. Here, we don't need words. We don't need gestures. Everything is understood, shared. Ethan took a deep breath, still adjusting to the surreal atmosphere. This is incredible. I know, she said, her voice barely audible. Now let yourself go. Open your mind, Ethan. Let me see who you are. Let me see everything. The intensity of her request was overwhelming, but he felt an inexplicable pull, a connection that was undeniable. Slowly, he began to lower his mental walls, allowing her to see more of him than he had ever shared with anyone. His childhood, his struggles, his triumphs, his fears. It all flowed freely, like a stream of memories and emotions, laid bare before her. In turn, Kaire opened herself to him. He felt her memories, her joys and her pains, her life as an alien navigating a world of complex emotions. He saw her childhood, how she was raised in a community that valued deep connection and understanding. But there was also loneliness, a feeling of being apart, different. He saw her moments of doubt, her journey of self-discovery, and her longing for something more. As their thoughts and memories intertwined, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace, like a heavy burden being lifted. He no longer felt like an outsider in her world. He felt like he was becoming part of it. After what felt like an eternity, they stood in silence, gazing at each other. The air around them seemed to hum with the energy of their shared experience. I never thought I could open myself like this, Kaire said, her voice thick with emotion. But with you, it feels natural. Ethan looked at her, his heart full. I feel the same way. It's like I understand you in a way I never thought possible. Kaire stepped closer to him, her eyes locked onto his. And I understand you, Ethan, in a way that no one else could. Our connection is unlike anything I've ever known. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he cupped her face. I don't want this to end. I don't want to go back to what we were before. Kaire's gaze softened. Then we won't. We've crossed a threshold, Ethan. There's no going back. He closed the distance between them, pressing his lips gently to hers. The kiss was tender, slow, a quiet promise between them. But as the kiss deepened, Ethan felt a warmth building between them, something far stronger than mere attraction. It was the bond they had forged, the understanding they had reached. When they finally pulled apart, they stood close, their foreheads resting together. Kaire whispered, I've always believed that true connection transcends the physical. But this is something different. Ethan nodded, his voice barely a whisper. It's more than I ever expected. They stayed like that for a long moment, simply holding each other in the quiet aftermath of their shared experience. There were no words left to say, just the deep, unspoken understanding that had passed between them, woven into the very fabric of their souls. I think we've just begun something amazing, Ethan said, his voice full of awe. Kare smiled, a soft, contented smile. I agree. Together, we have crossed a line we can never uncross, and I wouldn't want it any other way. They stood together in the realm of reflection, the world around them a quiet, glowing witness to their connection. For the first time, Ethan truly felt at home, not just in the vast expanse of space, but in the company of someone who understood him in ways he never thought possible. And as he held Kare close, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Chapter 5. Exploring Intimacy. Ethan woke up early the next morning, the soft hum of the Mireva space station drifting into his consciousness. He rolled over and glanced at the small window beside his bed. The stars twinkled far beyond the glass, but today they felt closer, more personal than they ever had before. His mind kept returning to her presence, the bond they'd shared, the shared memories and emotions that had fused them in a way he couldn't quite explain. The connection between them had deepened in ways he hadn't expected. They had shared so much already, yet there was still so much to discover about each other, both in terms of culture and emotion. He had always believed that intimacy meant physical closeness, the sensation of touch, the shared gaze. But what he had with Kare felt different. It was a fusion of souls, something far deeper than anything he had ever known. His communicator buzzed beside him, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw Aray's name flashing. Good morning, she said, her voice soft and warm through the speaker. Are you awake? I am now, Ethan replied with a smile. I was just thinking about you. There was a slight pause on the other end, as if she was searching for the right words. I was thinking about you, too. About what we shared yesterday. I've never felt so connected to anyone before. It's as though there's no barrier between us. Ethan sat up in bed, feeling the weight of her words. I know what you mean. I've never experienced anything like this. It's hard to explain. She paused again. I'd like to see you. In person. I feel this pull toward you, Ethan. His heart raced. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she expressed her feelings, that made him feel both nervous and excited at the same time. I like that too, he said, voice low and earnest. I'll be there in a few minutes. By the time Ethan arrived at Kare's quarters, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. He knocked on the door and waited for her soft voice to call him inside. Kare was standing near the window when he entered, her silhouette framed against the starlight. She turned toward him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, those ever-changing, vibrant eyes, spoke volumes. You came, she said quietly, almost as if she had been unsure if he would. Of course, Ethan replied, stepping inside, his eyes never leaving hers. I didn't want to wait another moment. Kare took a step toward him, her movements fluid, almost like she was gliding. Neither did I. They stood facing each other for a moment, the tension between them palpable. It was as though their bond had already forged a path, but now they were standing on the edge, ready to take the next step, unsure but willing. I've been thinking about yesterday, Kare said, her voice soft but firm, about how much we shared. It was beautiful, but I don't think that's the end. I think there's more we can discover together. Ethan nodded, his heart beating faster now. I feel it too. But, we've already crossed so many lines, already shared so much. How do we keep going from here? She smiled gently, stepping even closer to him. By trusting that there is always more to learn. By not being afraid of the unknown. Kare reached out and gently cupped his face in her hands, her touch light but purposeful. Are you afraid, Ethan? He shook his head slowly. No, I'm not. But it's different, isn't it? This kind of intimacy. It's not just about touching, about what's physical. No, Kare agreed, her voice full of understanding. It's about giving a part of yourself, letting someone in, trusting that they'll understand, even without words. Ethan swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. I want to give you that. I want to share more. But it's not just about physical closeness, is it? Kare stepped even closer now, so close that their bodies almost touched. Her presence was overwhelming in the best way possible, and yet Ethan still couldn't shake the feeling that this was a journey into unknown territory, one that required every ounce of vulnerability and trust. She leaned in slightly, her lips brushing against his ear. It's about understanding each other beyond the surface, feeling each other's emotions, seeing each other's fears and desires. It's about letting go of everything that holds us back. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine, her words stirring something deep within him. "I want that," he said hoarsely. "I want to feel that with you." Kara finally closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was slow, tentative, but full of promise. Ethan responded instantly, his hands moving to her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, and as their bodies finally touched, it was like the universe itself aligned. There was no space between them now, nothing separating their souls. When they finally broke the kiss, they both stood there, breathless, their foreheads pressed together. Kara's hands were still on his chest, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of his shirt. "I've never felt anything like this," she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. Ethan smiled, his own heart racing. "I know. It's different, isn't it? But it feels right." "I want to be with you, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Not just in the way we've been, but fully. In every way." He nodded, his hands now running up her back, pulling her in tighter. "I want that too, Ka." Their kiss resumed, this time with more urgency, as if they had both realized that there was no turning back, no need to hold back. Their connection was already so strong, so real, that nothing else seemed to matter. Kara gently pushed him back toward the bed, guiding him as if they were both in sync with some silent rhythm. Ethan let himself be guided, his hands roaming over her back, feeling the smoothness of her skin under his fingertips. As they collapsed onto the bed, the kiss became more heated, their bodies pressing closer, as if trying to merge into one. Kara's fingers moved through his hair, and Ethan pulled her flush against him, their bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle that had finally found its match. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low, though his hands were already working to remove the barriers between them. "Yes," Kara whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "I've never been more certain." With that, their lovemaking began in earnest, slow, intense, and full of meaning. There were no words needed, only the feeling of their connection growing stronger with each touch, each kiss, each shared breath. And as they moved together, both of them trembled, not just from the physical pleasure, but from the depth of what they had shared, what they were building. It wasn't just about their bodies. It was about everything they had given each other, everything they were willing to become. As they lay there afterward, tangled in each other's arms, Kara smiled softly. "We have so much to explore, Ethan. This is just the beginning." And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly connected to her, to the stars, and to the boundless possibilities that lay ahead. Chapter 6. Tests of Trust. The air on Mireva Station was thick with the buzz of activity as Ethan walked down the hallway toward the diplomatic meeting room. There had been an unexpected development, and the delicate balance of interspecies relations was on the line. A high-level negotiation was taking place, involving multiple factions with differing agendas. He'd been asked to attend as a neutral party, to represent the humans and provide an external perspective on some of the more sensitive issues that had arisen. As he reached the door to the meeting room, he paused for a moment, letting the weight of the situation settle in. His connection with Kyra had deepened over the past few weeks, and now, as tensions rose in the station's diplomatic circles, their relationship felt more vulnerable than ever. He hadn't told her about the complexity of this meeting. He hadn't wanted to burden her with the political intricacies that came with his job. But as the situation had grown more precarious, he realized he couldn't keep her in the dark any longer. Ethan entered the room, nodding to the various officials who were seated around the long table. He took his place at the far end, trying to ignore the way his stomach twisted in anticipation. The meeting began immediately, with each representative outlining their position. For the next hour, Ethan listened, his mind processing the arguments and counter-arguments, weighing the stakes. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Kara. He could only imagine the pressure she might be feeling, her role as a diplomat for her people adding its own weight to the ever-growing tension. Finally, the meeting broke for a short recess, and Ethan found a quiet space to gather his thoughts. He pulled up his communicator and sent a message to Kyra. "Ethan, I need to talk. It's been a long day." It wasn't long before a soft ping from his device signaled a reply. "Kyra, are you all right? What's going on?" He leaned against the wall, feeling the familiar weight of her concern. "Ethan, there's a diplomatic situation here. Things are complicated. I'm in the middle of a negotiation. I should have told you sooner." There was a pause before her response appeared on his screen. "Kyra, you've always told me about your work. But this feels different. I can sense it. Are you in danger?" He took a deep breath, rubbing his forehead. "Ethan, not physically. But it's delicate. There are different factions here, and I'm caught in the middle of it. I don't want to involve you, Kara, but I trust you more than anyone. Her reply came swiftly. Kara, you don't have to protect me from the truth, Ethan. I'm here for you. But you're also right, you can't do this alone. He smiled softly, even in the midst of his growing unease. Ethan, I'm glad you're here. I don't know what's going to happen next, but your presence feels like a constant in all this chaos. Kara, we will get through it together. He tapped his communicator off, feeling a quiet strength flood through him. As the recess ended, he walked back to the meeting room, his mind now focused with a renewed clarity. No matter what happened, he wasn't alone. The meeting stretched on for hours. Tensions were high, and the negotiations grew more difficult with each passing moment. Ethan kept his composure, but internally, he was exhausted. Each faction seemed to have its own agenda, and every word he spoke was met with counter-arguments, each one more insistent than the last. His thoughts kept drifting to her. What was she doing? Was she okay? Their connection had become so deep that it almost felt like they could feel each other's emotions, even across the distance. He could sense her concern, even through the communicator, and it made him want to wrap everything up as quickly as possible. Finally, the meeting broke for the evening. Ethan excused himself and stepped out into the hallway. He needed air. He needed space to think. But as he walked down the corridor, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Kara, her figure silhouetted against the dim lights of the hallway. She was dressed in her usual attire, elegant and fluid, but there was a tension in her posture that mirrored his own. Kara, he said softly, stepping toward her. What are you doing here? She met his gaze with a quiet strength. I felt your restlessness, your uncertainty. I knew I needed to be here. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I didn't want to burden you. I thought I could handle this on my own. You don't have to, she replied, her voice gentle. You never have to handle everything on your own. He looked at her, his chest tightening. I don't want to put you in the middle of this. It's complicated. I'm already in the middle of it, she said firmly. I'm connected to you, Ethan. Your struggles are mine, but you're also part of my struggle. I won't turn away. Ethan stepped closer, needing her presence, her warmth. I'm not used to having someone like this, someone who truly understands me. It's not just about work or the mission, Kara. It's about everything, the bond we share. Kara reached out, her hand gently cupping his cheek. I know. I've never felt this way before either. This isn't just about diplomacy or politics. It's about something deeper, something we've built together. But if we're going to make it through this, we have to trust each other. All the way. His heart raced as he looked into her eyes. He felt a pull, a connection that went beyond words. I trust you, he whispered. More than I've ever trusted anyone. She smiled softly, her thumb brushing his jaw. Then let me help. Let me stand with you. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the station fading into the background. Ethan had never felt so sure of anything. The diplomatic situation was still unresolved, and the politics of the station still weighed heavily on him. But with Kara by his side, he knew they would face whatever came next together. I don't know what will happen with the negotiations, he said finally. But I know this. I'm not facing it alone anymore. Kara nodded, her voice calm and reassuring. And you won't. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. You've already proven that you can navigate this world, Ethan. I have no doubt you'll succeed. He pulled her into his arms, feeling the warmth of her body against his. Thank you for being here, for understanding. She hugged him tightly, resting her head against his chest. I'll always be here, no matter the distance, no matter the obstacles. Ethan closed his eyes, holding her close, the weight of the station's political climate momentarily fading away. With Kara by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel alone. Chapter 7: Unraveling Secrets. The days that followed the intense negotiations were filled with a quiet, reflective tension. While the diplomatic situation on Mireva Station had stabilized for the moment, Ethan found himself growing restless. The diplomatic parties had temporarily agreed on a ceasefire, but there were still many layers of unspoken tensions beneath the surface. The exchange of gestures and words had left him feeling disconnected from the one person who understood him completely, Kara. He had spent so much time in the flux of interspecies diplomacy that he hadn't had the chance to fully focus on what was happening between him and her. As much as they had shared, there were still things left unsaid, moments left unexplored. One evening, after a long day of navigating the delicate lines of station politics, he received a message from Kare. Kare, come to me. There is something I must share. The simple message stirred something in his chest. He didn't even have to think about it. Ethan immediately set off toward her quarters. He wasn't sure what it was, but Kare's tone had shifted, and it made him want to be there to support her, to understand whatever was troubling her. When he arrived, Kare's door opened without a sound. She was standing by the window, her face cast in the soft glow of the distant stars. There was an air of quiet contemplation about her, but there was something else, something deeper. It was almost as though she was waiting for something, or someone. Kare? Ethan said softly, stepping inside. She turned, her expression unreadable. Ethan, she replied, her voice quieter than usual. I'm glad you came. He approached her slowly, his gaze searching hers. What's going on? You've been different these past few days. Kare took a deep breath, as though bracing herself. I've been thinking a lot, Ethan. About us, about everything we've shared. There's something I need to tell you. Something I've kept from you. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what to expect, but Kare's seriousness made him nervous. You can tell me anything, Kare. Whatever it is, I can handle it. She turned away from him, her gaze falling to the floor. The silence stretched between them, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if she was going to keep this to herself. But then Kare spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't always like this, the way I am now. The person you know. She paused, gathering her thoughts. There's a part of me that I've never shown you. A part of me that I've hidden for a long time. Ethan stepped closer, his concern growing. Kare, what are you talking about? She raised her eyes to meet his, the weight of her emotions in them. I wasn't born into a world like yours, Ethan. I wasn't raised in a peaceful society. My people, the Varethians, we've spent generations dealing with things you can't imagine. The reason we value connection, the reason we bond so deeply, it's because we have been torn apart for so long. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? Kare walked to a nearby console, and with a gentle press of her fingers, a holographic image appeared between them. It showed a world, lush, vibrant, full of life, but beneath the surface, there was something darker. This, Kare said softly, is my home. A place where once our people lived freely, without the weight of war and fear. But centuries ago, our ancestors were forced into a brutal conflict with another species, one that saw us as a threat. The Varethians were scattered, our cities destroyed. We learned to hide, to connect with each other in ways that were once unheard of. It was the only way we could survive. Ethan could feel the weight of her words. Kare, I didn't know. You've never mentioned this before. She nodded. I've never told anyone. Not even my own people know the full extent of the history. Some of them think the war ended centuries ago. But the truth is, it never really did. We've spent generations rebuilding, but there are scars that remain. I've never known peace the way you do. And the connection we share, it's something I cherish deeply, because it's all I've ever wanted. A place to belong. Ethan stood in stunned silence, his mind struggling to absorb what she was telling him. He wanted to reach out to take her hand, but he didn't know if she was ready for that yet. Instead, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You've carried this alone for so long. You've never let anyone see it. Why now? Kare's gaze flickered to him, her expression softening. Because with you, I don't have to hide anymore. With you, I've learned what it means to trust again, to let someone in. But there's a fear in me, Ethan. A fear that once you see the darkness of what I've lived through, you'll pull away. Ethan moved closer, his voice firm. Kare, nothing you've told me changes how I feel about you. If anything, it only makes me want to be closer to you. You've been carrying this for so long. You don't have to anymore. I'm here, Kare. You're not alone in this. Her eyes filled with tears, the vulnerability she had so carefully guarded now fully exposed. She stepped forward, placing her hands on his chest, her face tilted up toward his. I've always feared this moment. That I would show you this side of me, and you would leave. That the person I am now wouldn't be enough. Ethan cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen. "You're more than enough. You always have been. Your past, your struggles, they don't change the way I see you. They make me respect you even more." Kare looked up at him, her breath coming faster, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her emotions. Slowly, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was full of raw, unspoken emotion. It was not just a kiss of passion, but one of shared understanding, a connection that went deeper than anything physical. When they pulled apart, Kare's eyes were filled with a mixture of wonder and relief. "I've never felt like this before, Ethan. This is what it means to be truly seen." Ethan smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. "And I'll always see you, Kare. Every part of you. You don't have to hide anymore." They stood in the quiet of her quarters, the world outside forgotten for a moment. In that space, there was only the truth they had shared, the truth that bound them even closer, not just as two people from different worlds, but as two souls, entwined in a way that was both fragile and unbreakable. Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. There was still so much to uncover, so much more to explore, but for now, in the stillness of the moment, he was content. Together, they would face whatever came next, stronger for the truth they had discovered and the trust they had built. Chapter 8: Promises Under Cosmic Skies. Ethan had never seen the stars like this before. It wasn't just the brilliant display of lights out in the distant reaches of space. It was the feeling that they weren't just far-off objects anymore. They were part of his world now, part of something bigger, something deeper than anything he had ever experienced. The station was quiet tonight, the hum of machinery distant, and the glow from the stars outside bathed everything in a soft, almost dreamlike light. He stood at the observation deck, gazing out at the endless expanse, lost in thought. Behind him, the door to Kare's quarters opened, and he didn't need to turn to know it was her. The gentle shift of energy in the air, the familiar scent of her presence. Everything about Kare was woven into the very fabric of his life now. "Ethan," her voice called, low and steady, as she approached him. "I was hoping you'd be here." He smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him as she came closer, her silvery skin glowing softly in the low light. "I couldn't stay away," he replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I wanted to look at the stars." Kare joined him at the viewport, standing silently for a moment, both of them staring out at the boundless stretch of space. The quiet was comfortable, an unspoken understanding settling between them. It wasn't often they had time like this, just the two of them, away from the pressures of station politics, away from the demands of everything else. "I've been thinking too," she said after a while, her voice breaking the silence. "About us. About everything we've shared, everything we've learned. I feel like we're on the edge of something, but I don't know what it is." Ethan glanced at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd felt it too. There was something shifting between them, something fragile yet incredibly strong, something that had started with connection and understanding, but now it felt like something more. "I think about it all the time," he said softly. "What we've been through together, what we've shared. I feel like I'm learning a new way to live, to feel. With you." Kare looked at him, her eyes glimmering with something deeper. "I've never felt anything like this before. My people, we bond deeply, but this is different. What we have, it's not just connection. It's something else." Ethan took a step closer to her, drawn in by the warmth of her presence. He had always been someone who prided himself on his ability to keep his emotions in check, to compartmentalize. But with Kara, everything felt raw and real. Nothing felt distant. "I don't want to hide from this," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside him. "I don't want to hold back anymore. I want to be with you. All of you." Kare smiled, a mixture of warmth and vulnerability in her eyes. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Ethan. But there's still something I'm holding back. Something I haven't shared." Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. "What is it?" She hesitated for a moment, as though deciding whether to say the words. "It's a part of my past. Something I've never told anyone." Ethan reached out and gently touched her arm, his touch reassuring. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready. But whatever it is, you're not alone. I'm here." Kare met his gaze, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was only the two of them, two souls entwined, standing together beneath the weight of everything they had shared. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I've kept this part of me hidden for so long, but I need you to know it. I want you to understand. Ethan stepped closer, gently lifting her chin so that their eyes locked. You don't have to be afraid. I'm here. We're in this together. Garay took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to place them on his chest. I come from a world where our people were once isolated, fearful of the unknown. We lived in constant conflict, torn between our own kind and others who didn't understand us. There was so much pain, so much loss. Ethan felt his heart ache as she spoke, his mind picturing the pain she had endured, the weight of her history pressing down on her. I didn't know. She shook her head, her eyes shimmering. No one knows. My people don't speak of it. We've tried to bury it to move on, but it's always been a part of me, part of who I am. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as though trying to offer her some comfort, some relief from the burden she had carried for so long. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Whatever you've been through, it's in the past. You have me now. Tharay's voice was soft, but trembled with emotion. I've never shared this with anyone. But with you, Ethan, I feel like I can. I want you to know me completely. All of me. He kissed her forehead gently, the sensation of her warmth filling him with a sense of peace. I want to know you. All of you. I'm not afraid of your past, Kara. I'm not afraid of what you've been through. I'm only afraid of losing you. Her lips parted, her breath coming in shallow bursts. You won't lose me, Ethan. I promise. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything they had just shared. The silence between them was no longer heavy with doubt or fear, but full of understanding, of trust. Kare reached up and kissed him, her lips soft at first, tentative. But as the kiss deepened, something shifted between them. It was as though the universe itself held its breath, watching them, waiting. The kiss wasn't just physical. It was a promise, an unspoken vow that they would face whatever came next together. When they broke apart, their breaths mingling, Kara whispered, "We've come so far, Ethan. But I think we're only beginning to understand each other." Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of her hair from her face. "Then let's continue. Together. One step at a time." The stars outside seemed to glow a little brighter, as if they were in tune with the promise that hung between them. Together, they stood beneath the cosmic skies, no longer just two beings from different worlds, but two souls intertwined, ready to face whatever lay ahead. "I love you, Kerr," Ethan said, his voice steady, but full of depth. Tharate smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I love you too, Ethan. Always." As they held each other close, the universe around them felt a little smaller, a little warmer. There was no more fear, no more hesitation, just the quiet, unbreakable bond they had built, a bond that would carry them forward, wherever the stars took them.